Okay, everyone, welcome to another daily community meetup. It is Tuesday, April 7th. The joke now is this is daily meetup number 4,783, even though it's only like number 17. But it feels like it's been a long process of being home. And so I hope these meetings are still helpful for everyone who watches offline too. We're still getting some good downloads. So I think they're providing a sense of community, which makes me feel good too, that it's good to feel useful. So thank you for anyone who's just humoring me in that as well. Today's daily stoic I want to start off with, anyone that's in my coaching umbrella knows that this book is just the bomb, and today's was really good, I thought. Expect to change your opinions. Okay. We'll start with this reading. There are two things that must be rooted out in human beings: arrogant opinion and mistrust. Arrogant opinion expects that there is nothing further needed, and mistrust assumes that under the torrent of circumstance there can be no happiness. And that's Epictetus. I have a hard time with that name. And then the rest of it is, how often do we begin some project certain we know exactly how it will go? How often do we meet people and think we know exactly who and what they are? And how often are these assumptions proved to be completely and utterly wrong? This is why we must fight our biases and preconceptions, because they are a liability. Ask yourself, why haven't I considered? Why is this thing the way it is? Am I part of the problem here or part of the solution? Could I be wrong? Be doubly careful to honor what you do not know, and then set that against the knowledge you actually have. Remember, if there's one core teaching at the heart of this philosophy, it's that we're not as smart and as wise as we like to think we are. If we ever do want to become wise, it comes from the questioning and from humility, not, as many would like to think, from certainty, mistrust, and arrogance. Oh, that's a good one in our political culture. We'll just leave it at that. It's a very good one. All right, everyone. So we're going to do a quick meditation just to ground us and allow us to stop for a few moments, and then we will get to our special guest today. So if you will, except for the person who appears to be running or walking, close your eyes, and we're just going to take a few moments of gratitude. And if you're comfortable closing your eyes on video, that's fine. If you're not, no pressure. It's all about just finding a quiet space just for a minute, just to take a breath. Because if you're like me, these are few and far between, even at home. So just take a few deep breaths and let out everything that you breathe in. And think about one thing today that you are extremely grateful for. And allow yourself to be totally grateful for that one thing. And try and clench your shoulders, or unclench your jaw and release your shoulders. Take another deep breath. When there is beauty within you, when you understand that the great source of satisfaction exists within you, just as you are, then you don't need to bother with anything else. Very simply, when there is beauty within you, when there is love within you, then love grows up everywhere in your life. When there is giving in you, then giving grows up everywhere in your life. There is no need to manipulate or change anything, because there is already something utterly amazing in you, just as you are. I won't say that it's perfect, but I will say there is perfection there. You have in this life so few moments together with the people you love, or a lot of moments together with the people you love right now. But for that matter, you have so few moments in general. Maybe you'll see 30 or 40 more seasons and then you're finished. How then do you have time to manipulate anything or worry? It's really more of a question of appreciation. Let's simply appreciate deeply the moments we have together, opening ourselves to them and participating in them. That's enough. Nothing else is needed. So take one more deep breath, let it out, and open your eyes. All right, everyone. Thank you for that. Sorry for the text message ding during that, but it's life. It's reality. Well, I am so excited that you are all here for this special guest. I have been trying to connect with Samra for a long time on the podcast, and then she booked the podcast, and I'm like, well, I'm doing these things, and she said sure, and so welcome, Samra. It's good to see
Thank
you.
you. Thank you. So good to be here. Thanks for
And you
inviting
look beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
We
I
had a
thought
discussion offline. She's like, "Is this video?" And I'm like, "Yeah, but it's not that kind of video." But I know I
yeah,
ask the same thing every time I do an interview. I'm like, "Is this video? Do I need to like
yeah.
look
Do I
right?"
need to at least brush my hair?
Well, I always brush my teeth before these things. Like, explain that. That makes no
Yeah,
sense.
me too.
I do too.
I can't even drink water before I brush my teeth in the morning. So,
Yeah. Oh, me
so
too.
I
Like,
just
why
have
would
that.
you swallow that stuff?
Yes.
Yeah. No, sweet. We're gonna get along just
You
fine.
know the whole thing about brushing your teeth after breakfast. I just don't get it at all. Like, I mean, I would brush my teeth after breakfast, but I have to brush them before breakfast too.
Thank you. There's a particular person on this exact call that we've had this debate over, and I am so glad that you are on the right side of things. This is perfect. I know. I try and my kids, they think, well, why do we need to brush? And I'm like, how can you stand yourself?
I know. I like, how could you eat? How could you drink? Could you breathe? Like,
I know.
the first thing I have to do as soon as I get out of bed is brush my teeth.
Yeah, I can't even meditate without brushing my teeth. So like I get up, brush my teeth, and then I'll get back in the bed to meditate because I can't sit there. I'm like, I can't take it. I can't take it.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we are not dental hygienists or dentists, so we'll move on from that topic. But it's so great for you to be here, and I am so excited for you to tell your story. I've saw a TED Talk of yours and have been following you, especially most recently with all the stuff you've got going on with the domestic violence and the circle that you're doing. And so I think it's really awesome. So I would love if you would just tell your story. I know it's a big one. It's a big story, and I know a lot of people may not be joining this live, but a lot of people are going to listen. And I think it's such an important story to be told. So thank you again for being here. And I'll just turn the floor over to you and let you do what you do.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for inviting me, and I'm so glad that we were able to make it happen. And I love this intimate, casual kind of a feel to it. So
Yeah.
this is great, and this is exactly what we need right now. And that's why I started the connection circles that I do. And one branch of it is focused on domestic violence, but the other topics are also quite broad. And so this fits right in. As far as my story, I'll start off with the very beginning. I grew up in Abu Dhabi. I was born in Pakistan, so I'm originally from Pakistan. That's where my parents are from. And but I grew up in Abu Dhabi, and I grew up in a very small town where everybody knew everyone, and there were two schools. I went to one of them. I went to the British one, and there was another Arabic one and another Indian one. So I grew up with friends that I had throughout my entire life, throughout my entire childhood, and it was a very patriarchal family, patriarchal community, society, and I was the eldest of four girls. So I had three younger sisters, and all I could hear growing up, especially because I grew up quite tall, and I was already like the tallest among everybody when I was in grade 5 or 6. So my daughters totally understand that. Um, but I always heard things around, my cousins and even my parents and my aunts and uncles were always talking about my marriage. That yeah, Samra's going up really tall. She's like the eldest among of four girls. We've got to think about her marriage, her dowry, and I just would rebel. I was a rebel like since a very young age. So I'd like, no, I don't want to get married. I want to go to school. I want to go to Harvard. I want to go to Stanford. I want to do this. I want to change the world. I want to, have all these big dreams. So I pushed, and in my own little ways, I started a girls' cricket team in my school when I wasn't allowed to go outside and play cricket with the boys anymore. And then I started a school newspaper and to share all my radical ideas of gender equality. Um,
Love it. I
so
love it.
I was a bit of an envelope pusher, even at that young of an age. And but little did I know that all that would come to a crashing halt. I was 16 years old. I was doing my math homework in my room one day. I was in grade 11, and my mom came into my room. She put a glass of orange juice on the table. She stroked my hair lovingly, and then she told me, Samra, this friend of mine that you met a few times. I'm like, yeah, I know that friend. And like, well, she has a brother who lives in Canada, and their family is really interested in you as his wife. And my jaw dropped, and I'm like, Mom,
How old were you?
I
How
was
old?
16. I was
16.
16. And I said to my mom, like, Mom, what are you talking about? I'm 16. I'm in grade 11. I want to go to school. I want to get an education. And then over the next few weeks, the whole picture that was presented to me was that this is the best thing that could happen to me because I could go to school in Canada. And my mom said, you have all these big dreams. We can't really send you to university somewhere by yourself because you're a girl. Don't forget that. And no girl from our family has ever gone abroad to study. So if you're with your husband, we won't be worried about you. It won't look bad, and it's a win-win. And this is the best solution. This best thing that could happen. And when everybody around you tells you that this is the best thing for you, what do you do as a 16-year-old? Like, these are adults who I trusted, and these are my parents, and these are my aunts and uncles and my cousins, and everybody was like, oh, you're so lucky, you're the first girl among all of us to get married. And it was like as if it's some kind of big accomplishment that I've just achieved, even though it hardly felt like it. But so I lost my voice, I lost my identity through that process. And a few months later, just after my 17th birthday, I was sitting in a big grand banquet hall decked up in red and gold beside a man who was 11 years older than me. I'd never met him before, and he was now my husband. And then a few months after that, I arrived in Canada as his wife. I became pregnant right away because I had no idea about birth control. No one talks about it in our family. And I became a mom at the age of 18. And then I was told that, and I hadn't even finished high school. And then I was told I can't go to school because now I'm a wife and I'm a mother and I'm a daughter-in-law. It's my job to stay home and fulfill the proper duties of being a girl and a woman. And in fact, my mother-in-law would say to me that I should be grateful that I got to the real purpose of being a woman sooner rather than later, and didn't have to go through all that useless education crap.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, so and they were living with us. So his parents, me, and him, we were all living in the same house in Canada. And and then after that, the next several years were just the darkest years of my life. It He was very, very verbally and emotionally and physically abusive. It started off with a lot of verbal and emotional abuse, um, calling names, bad words, constantly hearing, I'm not good enough, you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, you're not this enough, you're not that enough. And whenever I would question him, why do you say all these horrible things to me? Um, he would respond, it's because you deserve it. And when you hear that on a daily basis, you hear the words, you deserve this, you're useless, you're worthless, like you start believing it. And I started believing that too. I started believing there's something inherently wrong with me, that I'm ugly, that I'm unlovable, that I'm, not worthy of kindness and love and respect. And it became such a dark time that there were times when I even just didn't want to go on. I didn't want to live. And in those moments, it was really looking at my daughter, that if something happens to me, then what is her future going to look like? It's probably going to look like this. So I knew that I had to keep going on for her. So even during those dark days, and they were very, very dark days, I often describe those days as living in a box with no light and enough air that you can just breathe and just survive barely, but not enough that you can actually breathe freely and thrive. So it's like living in this constant state of suffocation and walking in on eggshells and living with anxiety and just waking every day and hoping that it would be a dull, uneventful day. That would be a good day.
Mhm. Right.
So during those times, though, there was this voice in my head that just never went quiet, and it was this: one day I want to go to school. One day I will go to school. So when I wasn't allowed to go to high school, a regular high school to finish all my high school courses, I discovered this center called the Independent Learning Center. And it is a place where you can order your books and you can study at home. So when I called them and I asked, and the guy on the other end said, most kids your age who do their high school courses through ILC and not to a regular high school, they're kids who are in prison for some reason. And that's why they can't go to school. And I said to the person that, yeah, it's kind of the same situation here, because that's what my life was like. I wasn't allowed to go out of the house anywhere, make friends, have any independence, agency. I wasn't even allowed to go to my backyard because he didn't want other people to look at me and look at his property. So I ended up ordering my courses through ILC. I knew that I had to do whatever I could to gain little bits of independence and financial freedom. There's a heartbreaking scene in my book where I can't even buy a donut for my daughter, and I don't even have a toonie. Toonie is $2 to buy a donut for my daughter, and a kind man offers to pay for it, which is I remember feeling so um, helpless and powerless and humiliated in that moment, and just knew that I had to do whatever I could to earn little bits and pieces of freedom and independence. So I started studying at home. So I would do all my chores during the day, take care of him and his family, and then I would go into my room at night and I would study. I was given permission to do that because I wasn't going outside. So it took me about 5 or 6 years to finish my high school courses. And during those days, I had no hope that I would ever actually be able to go to university. I I just, you know, according to him and his family, these were just my silly little hobbies. Um, so as long as they weren't interfering with my household duties, it was okay. So, but even during those days, I would stand in front of a mirror with a piece of paper rolled up in my hand, like a fake degree, and practice my graduation speech that I would one day deliver. So kept the hope alive in different ways. And then I got into university, but then my husband and his family wouldn't pay my university tuition fee because there was no useless money to waste on my silly little hobbies. And then I couldn't get government funding because they look at household income, and his income was above that threshold. So I knew that I had to make money at home. And I stumbled upon this community ad in a grocery store for home babysitting services. And I was like, people can actually make money watching other people's kids. I can do that. I've got two kids of my own. So I started to put ads around the neighborhood and Kijiji and Craigslist and the online stuff. And I started to build a bit of a clientele, and I started a home-based daycare. And I did that for the next 2, 3 years, and most of my money would be taken away from me to put towards the household expenses, but I would still stash away secretly a little bit on the side every month, just $50, $200, $100, and it took me another few years to save the $2,500 or so that I needed for my first year tuition fee as a part-time student in university. So I applied again. This time got in, and I put my foot down and had a bit of leverage now because I was making money. So I was able to use that if you don't allow me to go to university, I'll stop working. And they were already used to the additional income. And so it was finally after 9 years of marriage and two children when I was sitting in my first ever lecture at the University of Toronto. And it was a magical moment. I got there 15 minutes earlier or before class began. I just sat there with a big goofy smile and tears streaming down my face, and not believing that I was actually in school. And then something magical started to happen. People were treating me with kindness and respect, and I was getting straight A's, and people wanted to be my friend and study with me and hang out with me. And I would hear things like, hey, how did you solve that question? You want to go to Starbucks tomorrow and study together? And then it's, Tuesdays is half price chicken wings at the student pub. You want to go have some with us? And this was the first time in my life that I was being treated with so much admiration and respect for exactly the things that I was always ridiculed for: my ambitions, my goals, my dreams, my intelligence, um, just what made me me. And when I was at school, when I was in university for those few hours, I was not a wife and a mother and a daughter in law. I was just Samra. And it felt amazing and it felt liberating. And then I would go home and I would be treated like dirt. I would be assaulted and humiliated and insulted. And by that time, you know, I was also physically assaulted several times. So I just couldn't understand, like, what's going on. If I'm this rock star that everybody seems to think I
Right.
am at school, then why am I being treated so badly at home? And I started to fight back, which made the assaults worse. And then one day I was walking on campus and I came across this sign which had a bunch of questions on it. Um, it said, "Do you feel intimidated? Like you've lost your voice? Like you can't go on? Like you're living in fear?" And I answered yes, yes, yes to all of those questions. And it said, "Come in and make an appointment. We're here to talk." And it was the Health and Counseling Center. So I went in and I booked an appointment, and a few days later, I was sitting across from my counselor, and the floodgates opened, and I started saying, "Can you please tell me what's wrong with me? Why do I? Uh, what is that secret to being a good wife that keeps eluding me? Why do I always keep messing up? What do I need to do better? Maybe if I cook better food, or wash better clothes, or keep the baby quieter at night, or not have opinions, maybe this will get better." And she heard me go on for an hour, and she's like, "It's not your fault. No matter what you do not deserve to be treated this way. No one deserves to be abused." That's the first time I heard the word abuse. And it just opened up my eyes. I'm like, what do you mean? There's a word for it? There's like, there's something, this thing is actually called something. And as I started going to counseling regularly, I learned what was happening to me indeed was abuse. It was not my fault. I did deserve better. And also about my rights in this country as a woman, as a human being, as a Canadian. And I found out that, you know, there there is something called child support. I will not lose my children if I left. I would not be deported if I were to walk out of the marriage, because those were all the lies that were fed into me by his family, that if I left I would lose my kids because I didn't have an education or a job, or I'd be deported because he sponsored me. So all those things were all lies to keep me trapped, but I had no way of knowing better. So now I learned all these things, and I also had hope that maybe it's not going to be all doomsday if I left. Um, but I couldn't leave right away because family pressures and cultural pressures, and I come from a family and community where divorce and single motherhood is highly highly stigmatized. So everybody was like, if you get divorced, who's going to marry your sisters? Who's going to marry your daughters? Like you'd be a source of shame to the family and the community. So I started fighting back at home, which it just made it so much worse, to a point where a few times he was about to kill me. And and that's when I knew that I can't wait anymore. I need to leave. Like, what if one day he goes too far? He was very close to strangling me once, and I just I still sometimes I think about that day and just get shivers run through me, because it would have taken another few seconds and I would have been gone. And I knew that I had to leave. So I was in my second year of undergrad university, and I picked up my kids. They were 9 and 3 at the time, and I left and I moved to campus housing at University of Toronto. They were because I didn't have a place to go to, and my husband had sold the house from under me, and it was a messy, messy situation. I was almost out on the streets, but luckily I was a student at university, and they were able to give me an emergency apartment on student housing on campus. So I moved there with my daughters. I had to pack all my stuff in garbage bags because I didn't even have money to pay movers, and just move stuff in my minivan for a few days. And I it was a small apartment, tiny 2 foot kitchen, no AC, shabby, ugliest green carpet that you could think of. But it was mine, and it was the first time in my life that I felt safe at home. And I picked up 4 or 5 on-campus jobs while going to school full time and raising my
Four
daughters.
or five. Did you say four or five?
Yeah, I was a TA. I was a research assistant. I was working at the office of the dean as a transition worker for first year students, and I was running doing night shifts at the student center, to selling bus tickets and campus tickets or movie tickets to students. And I discovered a secret way to make money was to sell homemade food to campus students, and I started selling butter chicken and biryani to
Oh
students on
my
campus, and
gosh.
made some money that way to make ends meet, and also made some friends who are still my friends, and I always tease them. I know you're my friends because of the food, and they're like, "Yeah, that's how it started, but now we love you."
Oh
so,
my goodness.
I just did whatever I could, to make ends meet, because going back was not an option. And yeah, there were times when I felt very like really bogged down by all of this, and maybe I shouldn't have left. Maybe I should go back, but then I would look at my daughters and I would just, think back that no, that's not the life I want for them. And I don't want them to grow up thinking that being abused is okay for whatever reason, especially because they're girls. And I didn't want them to grow up normalizing it.
Right.
And so I knew that I just needed to keep going one step, one day at a time, just focused on what was in front of me, because if I looked at everything that I had to do, like get a degree, get a job, create a new life, it was very overwhelming. But I just focused, okay, next step, next assignment, next test, next course, keep going. And then eventually it paid off in more ways than I could imagine. When I was in my final year, I graduated as the top student in the entire university, all three campuses combined. I was the winner of over 17 awards and scholarships in that year. There's one particular award, which is a $17,000 scholarship that goes towards your master's degree, and it's awarded to only one student every year from all three campuses combined at the university. And I was the first mature student to win that in since 1921, since it started. I won that.
Wow.
And
Wow. With your 4 or 5 jobs.
yeah,
You don't know, remember. It was 4 or 5.
two kids and two court cases.
Okay.
So when I won that award, for sure, like the recognition and the money was amazing, and I was super grateful. But the biggest thing that gave me was validation, that I was not crazy, that my dreams
Yes.
were valid, that all the things that people told me that I couldn't do, they were all lies. I did have the right to a better life. I did have the capability. I did have the intelligence. I did have the ability, and um, and I had the right to pursue my opportunities and dreams and goals. And I just wanted to, you know, get up on rooftops and scream that at the top of my lungs. And I knew by then through counseling and reading that this isn't just my story. This is the story of millions and millions of women and girls around the world who continue to suffer in silence. This is the story of millions of people, everybody, every one of us who feels, whether regardless of gender, race, culture, religion, who, all of us at some point feel that, we're not good enough, we're not smart enough, because society conditions us to believe that we have to morph ourselves or fit into a box or hide bits and pieces of ourselves to be accepted and respected and treated with love and kindness. And that's absolutely false, because respect and love is our birthright, and the way we are, we don't need to do anything else, we're enough the way we are. And I just wanted to do something. I couldn't stay quiet. I felt like, yeah, I had a choice. I could take my awards and my fancy new job and ride off into the sunset and just live my life, which would have been perfectly justifiable.
Right.
But I just had this hunger, this fire in me that I want to do something. I just can't stay quiet. And it was like bursting at the seams almost. And I didn't know what, but I just wanted to do something. So that answer came to me when I was graduating, and I was named the top student in economics. And on that graduation ceremony, my or award ceremony, a friend of mine, her mom wrote this blog, which was quite well followed, and she said, I'd love to interview you, and I'd love for you to, if you would be open to sharing your story. And initially I was like, oh my god, like no way, like what will people think, what, will it be a source of shame, it's too traumatic, it's my personal story, people who think I'm, airing my dirty laundry in public, etc., etc. And then my daughter, who was 10, no, 11 at the time, said, mom, if every woman thinks this way, how is this going to change? I think you should
Wow.
speak up. So I said, okay, and I shared my story. The blog went live on my convocation day, June 10th of 2013. So in the morning, I get my degree, which is already a very emotional moment for me. And then come home, and I log into my social media, and it is flooded with messages, thousands of messages from women and men all over the world, thanking me for breaking the silence, congratulating me, telling me how my story resonated, like oh, this is going on with me, or I saw my sister go through this, or this is my mom's story, or this is my story, or even something unrelated, like I lost my job last year and I didn't have, I just didn't know what to do with myself. I thought my life is over, but now you've shown me that it's never too late to reinvent yourself, so I'm going to go back to school. Like, these are just, people who were connecting with me based on that journey and experience. And I just, I used to always wonder up until that moment, why did all this happen to me? Why did I go through all that abuse and then come out with much more than I ever could have imagined? And I just knew that, like, there has to be a reason behind it. And that day I found the answer to my why. And I knew that I couldn't stop. And this was 7 years ago, and now in the past 7 years, my work has grown to a level where I speak on a lot of different uh, social justice, mental health, resilience, human rights topics all over the world. I speak in front of NGOs and UNICEF, and on all these. I speak for a lot of schools and universities around North America and even internationally now. And I also do a lot of work with corporations and in front of corporate audiences on resilience and authenticity in workplaces, because we don't leave bits and pieces of ourselves at the door when we show up to work,
Right.
and our vulnerability is what makes us whole and human. And um, and I do a lot of work on children's issues like mental health, and especially the effects of family violence on mental health. So it's taken a life of its own, and I've written a book which got published last year in March, and it became an instant bestseller in Canada. It's now being turned into a TV series.
Oh,
That's very
wow.
exciting.
Who gets to
Um,
play
I
you?
don't know yet. We're in the process of writing, so we're deciding on a screenwriter right now.
Oh, that's so
That's
exciting.
very exciting. So it's
Who
going
do
to
you
be.
want to play you?
Oh, I'm not allowed to say that yet.
Oh, you have someone though. But do you get that input? Will you
I
have
do. I
control?
do. That
Oh,
was actually my thing when I signed the rights. I'm like, I'm not just going to give away the rights to my story.
yeah.
I need an in on everything on the process. So yeah, I've got an in on every little creative piece,
That's awesome.
because I want the story to be authentic and true.
Right.
And I wanted to make sure the universality of the story comes forward and it doesn't become culturally, uh, sensationalized. So that's happening, and I just got named just a few months ago. I got named as one of the most top 100 most powerful women in Canada, which was personally, like, I won several awards and things, but this one was especially meaningful because the word powerful to me, for so long in my life I was made to feel absolutely powerless, and to now be recognized as one of the top 100 most powerful women in the country. That just um, it was just, you know really meaningful to me, because from going from powerless to feeling powerful, and to now being able to use my power to empower other people, because that's what I truly believe what real power is. It's about empowering other people. And um, and no matter what I do, the speaking, the book, the film, the TED Talks and all the stuff, the 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 purpose behind it remains the same, as it was when I first shared my story in 2013. It's that purpose of, like, maybe there's one woman out there, there's one person out there who needs to hear what I have to say. Maybe there's someone out there whose life I can touch through my voice and my words and my story, or my message. And my biggest gifts have been the messages that I receive every single day from people. Like, every day I wake up to messages on social media from people who reach out to me and tell me how they've been empowered to change their lives. And whether it's a man writing to me from Pakistan and saying, I'm canceling my teenage daughter's wedding and sending her to school after
Wow.
your story.
Wow.
Or just a few days ago, three schoolgirls from Kashmir, India, sent me a handwritten letter. Their principal scanned it and sent it to me because they read my book, and my book was in their school library, and they read it, and they told me that, now that we've read your book, we are not going to let anything stand in the way of our dreams. And I was in Kenya a couple of years ago doing a speech in front of high school girls there. And I started sharing my story in the third person and saying, there was a little girl just like you who had big dreams. And that's kind of how I walked them through the story. And I got to the part where she graduates as the top student, and they're all clapping. And I said, do you want to meet that girl? And they're now looking at the door thinking someone's going to walk in. And I told them that girl is me. And oh my God, they just ran to the stage and like threw their arms around me. And I have not heard these many I love yous in my life that I did in those few minutes. And just every time I get filled with any doubt if I'm on the right track, I just think back to that moment and I'm like, yes, I am. So it's just been heartwarming. And I was in Atlanta just a couple weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, before this whole COVID thing happened, and doing a speech for a big national Rotary conference there, and just met some amazing, wonderful people who are doing some amazing work on sex trafficking and other human rights violations, and being able to do my keynote there and bond with all of them. And it just goes to show that no matter where we are, no matter where we come from, no matter what color our skin is, what faith we practice, what gender we identify with, who we choose to love, we're all connected in so many ways. And the power of humanity and love and compassion and empathy that connects us is so much bigger, that anything that disconnects us, what unites us is so much more powerful than whatever is supposed to divide us. And when we operate from that place of shared humanity and experience, everything else, all these so-called differences fade into the background. And that's really my message. We need love to be louder than hate, especially in today's world and today's climate. And that's why we need more and more of us to start speaking up and start sharing and start connecting with each other from that human place and from that authenticity, because we all deserve to be seen and loved and respected for who we are.
Yeah.
We can all do that for ourselves and for each other.
So I saw your TED Talk, and then the book No Visible Bruises was recommended to me. I haven't read your book yet. I'm going to read it.
So my book is called A Good Wife.
A Good Wife.
Escaping the
Okay.
Life I Never Chose. It's available on Amazon, so you can or even any online retailer in North
And Kindle too. Do you have audio in Kindle?
Yeah.
Good.
I don't have audio yet. I'm in
Okay.
I will be recording it soon because I was insisting on recording it in my own voice. So
enjoy that. It's so fun.
I've heard from other authors, but I will record it soon. But yeah, ebook and the actual physical book. Absolutely.
Oh, good, because I know like Amazon's poking with books like paperback. So good that you have it on Kindle. So I'll actually get it on Kindle. But I was reading in No Visible Bruises, and this kind of goes to the question of people that aren't in the situation, that don't understand. Well, why don't women just leave? Why don't you just leave? Why do you stay for 9 years? And I had highlighted this particular passage, and I'd love for you to comment on it. They stay in abusive marriages because they understand something. Oh, my Kindle just shut off. Hold on. It's coming back. Sorry.
No problem.
It timed out. Okay. They stay in abusive marriages because they understand something that most of us do not. Something from the inside out, something that seems to defy logic. As dangerous as it is in their homes, it is almost far more dangerous to leave. They stay, they bide their time, they keep their children safe. They balance, poised on the front lines, hyper vigilant and patient, in a constant scan for when they can slip away intact. They do it for as long as they possibly can.
Yeah.
And I thought that was so, when you look at domestic violence and you have that question of why people are staying, and then you read something like that, oh no, they're just trying to do it at the right time. So in your experience, like what is the right time? I mean, I know that you have to get your stuff together sometimes. You can't just, but you, I mean, you grabbed a trash bag and took your 5 jobs, but not everyone's that brave. Like how do people know that they can just leave? Like how is that tied into your mission? Because
That's
I
such
know
a
it
great,
is.
that's such a great question, Meredith. And when I wrote my book, I made a list of all the things that I like, the questions that I wanted to answer, and that question was at the top of my list. Why do women stay? Because you hear it so much. Well, if he was so horrible, why didn't you just leave? Leaving is not a one-time thing. Leaving is a process, and it's a very long, drawn-out process. And for every woman, it looks different. And leaving doesn't even happen just one time. It's not linear. There are twists and turns. They're going back and forth. There's on average a woman would leave 7 times before she's finally able to leave, and sometimes never at all. So I am my like yes, I took my garbage bags and 5 jobs, but that was the sixth time that I tried to leave.
Right.
There were
Six.
5 times before when I tried to leave, and I either went back because I just didn't know how to move forward, or I was sent back by my family. So the first time I left, and I was sent back by my parents. The second time I left, my dad died, so I was sent back by my mom. The third time I left, I was just so overwhelmed. I went to a hotel and stayed there for one night, and I'm like, now what? What do I do now? I don't have friends. I don't have family. I don't have any money. I don't have a job. I don't have an education. And I went back. And then another time, I was told by like friends and family that you should give him another chance because he's realized it, and he was apologizing, and he was crying, and he was promising to make amends and change himself and do anything that it takes. So it's not linear. It's every time, but every time you leave and you go back, it's a lot of times women will think that, oh my gosh, maybe I just don't have it in me, maybe I
Right.
can't do it. And others would say that too, that, oh, you went back again, all right, like maybe you should just stay there. So people become very judgmental, and then you also as a victim become judgmental towards yourself. And that's what I'm trying to answer with my book as well, that it is not a one-time thing. It's not a linear process. And every time you try, even though it didn't succeed at that time, you're one step closer. So
Yeah.
in the overall scheme of things, you are moving towards that final stage. And as much as hard as leaving is, staying away is harder. And it's because it's kind of like that same situation where you take a prisoner out of prison after they've been incarcerated for years and years, and you put them in the middle of the city at Times Square and say, okay, go live your life, you're free. And that person doesn't even know where to begin. They don't have life skills, they don't have the necessary support system, they don't know how to get basic things done. It's very overwhelming, very intimidating. And then the shame and stigma that community and society inflicts upon them, what do? They reoffend, and they go back to what they know best and what's comfortable. And it's the same kind of thing with women who are being abused, and they come out of that. And now, like, I didn't know how to open a bank account. I didn't know how to get my car fixed. I didn't even know what networking means. And everybody was like, you have to network to get a job. What on earth is that? I was in university. I was 10 years older than everybody else. All in first year class, and yeah, I made some friends and stuff, but like I didn't fit in, and I was like, where do I belong? And then when people around you are like, um, well, the devil known is better than the devil unknown. At least he doesn't break your bones, and he doesn't, cheat
Wow.
on you. You should go back. Like, and then the shame of the culture, and my own brother-in-law calling me and saying, "What shame on you? You failed at the real purpose of being a woman. What's the point of you winning all these awards and scholarships?" So these are things you hear on so many levels, and you're conditioned by society to believe that as a woman you're incomplete because you're single, or you're not a mom, or you're not this, or you're not that. It is. And then the whole thing about, oh, a proper family is a two-parent family. And I'm telling you, like, there's no bigger lie than that, because my kids have struggled with trauma because of the family abuse or the violence that they saw, especially my older daughter. And something I say to women all the time: don't stay for the sake of your kids, leave for the sake of your kids. Because even though, yes, right now you may think it's best to give them that two-parent family and that father and everything, but if that family is not healthy, if there's not love there, if they're seeing fighting and abuse, Kids, and even though you're not fighting in front of them, kids feel it, they observe it, they internalize it, they are traumatized by it, and it will lead to a lot of other issues later on. And when I left my marriage, my kids were 9 and 3. And then when my older daughter turned 15, 16, she displayed a lot of signs of trauma and mental illness. And it's been a journey to get out of that. And we're doing really well now. And she's a rock star. She's starting university in September. But it was a very tough and very long road to recovery. So one thing that I wish I could go back and change is that, leave sooner for their sake. So, but the point I'm trying to make is that as a woman, as a victim, like, leaving is not a linear thing. It's not a one-time thing. And and couple that with the barriers that you face in your culture, community, or maybe financial barriers. Maybe you don't have the right support system, and then your confidence is super low because of the years and years of abuse that chips away at your self-esteem and sense of self-worth. Then you think, well, if the husband that I think is, who loves me, who says he loves me, and he thinks that I'm not good enough, and I'm not worthy enough, then maybe others will think that way too, and no one will want to hold my hand, and no one will want to talk to me. And as human beings, what's our biggest fear? It's isolation, it's rejection. We all want to be loved, we all want to be cared for. We are wired for connection. So when we are afraid that we're going to lose that and no one will want to talk to us or be with us, that's really, really scary. So and so leaving is actually scarier than staying. And
Right,
it's
because
a
it's the
journey.
unknown, right?
Mhm.
It's the unknown that is
The
the
unknown.
most
And
terrifying.
so you're always just trying to be on that balancing act of, like, you're not ready to leave. So you're just trying to do whatever you could to deal with what's going on. And, you're always walking on eggshells. You're living in this, oh gosh, I just wish this is a dull day. I just wish it doesn't, the other shoe doesn't drop and he doesn't get pissed off at me today. And so you're always hyper vigilant. And that's, that word really rang true to me.
Yeah.
And so you stay until leaving is scarier than staying, and then you leave when staying becomes scarier than leaving. And
Yeah.
for every woman, that tipping point is different.
And
It
I
took
think there's such
For
a
me, it took 11
connection.
years. Mhm.
Yeah, sorry. I was going to say, when you were talking about the process, you leave once, you leave 6 times,
Mhm.
7. That reminds me so much of quitting addiction, quitting
Yeah,
drinking. I'm 4 years
absolutely.
sober. And like, when I talk to people, because I quit drinking December 12th, 2015, that was the last day. And everyone's like, how did you just quit that day? I'm like, I quit 100 times before that day. That was just the
Exactly.
day that stuck. And it was when I had enough, when it was done, and I knew it, that I was done. And so all of that you're saying, it rings very true
It's very
to
similar.
me, because yeah,
It's very
you,
similar because when you're in trauma, when you're in abuse, you do get addicted to the highs and lows. Like, it's the chemical reactions in your brain, and there's, I could get into the psychology of it, but I won't. But it is the same kind of feeling, because you're at one hand, there's all this drama and the abuse, and you're like, oh my God, what's going? And then the little crumbs of affection that come your way after, you latch on, and then the dopamine spike is just so much higher, and you're like, yes, this person loves me, and you feel validated and you feel worthy, and you get hooked onto that feeling. And so, because abusive relationships, as much as they show in the movies and the media, it's like, oh, it's all bad and the guy's trying to kill her and all of that. It's not like that. There's a cycle, and there's a lot of good there. So there's like an abusive episode, and then there's a honeymoon period where this person could not be better, and then the tension starts building up, and then there's the abusive episode, and it's just a cycle. And sometimes that cycle is drawn out over years. Like, there will be, one slap or one abusive episode, and for months or years it would be all great. Or sometimes it's more frequent and it intensifies over time. So and the other thing is, it never starts with a slap or a kick. It starts with those little underhanded compliments, those offhand remarks, those little insults and digs at your expense, those little jokes at your expense. It starts off that way. So when, by and those little things are like little hits to you, but then you think, oh, it's just one comment. I shouldn't make such a big deal out of it. It's okay. He's so wonderful in so many other ways. I'm not going to leave him because of this one stupid thing. All of us say stupid things, and you brush it under the rug. And then guess
Right.
what? The next time your tolerance level becomes even higher, and then higher, and then I often describe this as this frog analogy. If you put a frog in hot boiling water, the frog will jump out and run away. But if you put the frog in cold water and turn the heat up ever so slightly, the frog's body will keep adjusting to the rising temperature of the water, and the frog will eventually cook to death without even realizing.
Right.
So it's the same thing, the over time, the insidious progression of abuse, it raises your tolerance level, and then you start accepting everything, that you would not have accepted on day one, but
Right.
now on, day 1000, it's your norm, it's your new norm. So when
Right.
that finally that slap or kick comes, you think that's your fault too, and you deserve that too. And sometimes that slap or kick never comes. So a lot of women continue to stay in abusive relationships that are psychologically and emotionally abusive, but they're no less damaging. In fact, they're even more damaging sometimes, because it takes a toll on your entire being. And I was physically abused in my marriage, but the things that still haunt me, and the things that I still struggle with sometimes, is the emotional and psychological
Emotional
aspect
abuse.
of it.
Are
So
you good with taking a question? Someone has a
yes,
question.
absolutely, yes,
Okay,
please.
I'm gonna unmute you. All right, go ahead.
I found myself becoming disassociated from the abuse, both in a physical and sort of psychological way. And would you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that becomes one of the coping mechanisms. And I remember even in my marriage, there was towards the end of it, I'm like, I don't even care anymore. Like just gonna pretend that this doesn't happen and just focus on the good parts, because that became my coping mechanism. If I focused on, if I really thought about the abuse and thought about what's happening to me, I would not have been able to go on. And that disassociation doesn't just stop, when you leave the marriage, or leave the abuse. It comes back later on too. Like there are things that came up for me when I was writing my book, which was like 7 years or 8 years after I'd left my marriage. And those things that came up that I had blocked it away in some remote corner of my brain, and just because I wasn't ready to deal with the trauma. Like I was raped once during my marriage, and I just did not want to deal with that. So I had put it away, and it was the day after my dad died. And I didn't want to admit to myself because what had happened. But when I was writing my book, it came up at that time, and I did put it in the book. It is a scene in the book. And I had such a tough time. Like I had to go into therapy throughout the process of writing my book, because there were so many things that came up that I had completely disconnected myself from. And at that time, when I talked to my therapist, like, why now? Like, why didn't I deal with it then? He said, because Samra, you didn't have the capability to deal with it then. You just weren't in the right place emotionally and psychologically. So, the fact that you disassociated with yourself is like, that's your brain's way, and your emotion, your being's way to deal with that at that time. So don't blame yourself for it. And that's a coping mechanism, and that's absolutely necessary. Even stuff in my childhood that I disassociated with myself from, because I didn't want to think that my parents didn't love me, or the trauma that they inflicted upon me by pushing me into this marriage. And my father was an abuser, and when I was growing up, I almost idolized him, because he was always encouraging me to believe in my dreams. But he was an abuser to my mom. And when I was writing the book, that came up a lot, and I struggled with all the complexities of the emotions that came up for me during that time. That, well, then my father was not a good person. And um, and in fact, a lot of the abuse that I tolerated in my marriage was because I had seen that as a child,
Yeah.
and I thought that that was my norm, that was normal. Had I not seen that, and I had my father been a respectful and loving spouse, I probably, that would have been my benchmark for my own marriage. So there's the fact that you disassociated yourself from that is very, very normal. And we all do that when we struggle with, or we're inflicted by trauma. So all I'll say is, like, now that you've recognized it, um, you know um, uh, it see what you can do about it. Like what I did was, I'm still in therapy, and I have no shame in saying that. and I probably always will be, because I'm such a big proponent of therapy and mental health. But it's you can recover from it, and the more you recognize it, you can deal with it, you can think of coping mechanisms, and you can draw the boundaries with those people who were in your life who inflicted that upon you or who remind you of that, the better it is. And you just are able to cope with it in a much healthier way. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, that's great, Samra. Do you have time for one more question, or do you
I
have a
have a
hard
lot of
stop?
time. No, I
Okay,
don't have a
okay,
hard stop.
okay,
Yeah, yeah, we can
okay.
go on.
There's one more question that came to me personally. How did you help your children through the trauma?
That's a great question, and I'll share something which now my daughter has given permission for me to share. My daughter, when she was 15 or so, I discovered that she was self-harming and she was suicidal, and it was a big, big blow to me that, why now? Like, we've left, it's been 6, 7 years since we've left the marriage. Like, what's going on right now? Like, I just couldn't understand it, and I didn't know how to cope with it. I just didn't know how to support her. And there were times when I would say things like, what do you have to complain about? You have such a great life now. We've gone through our things, and I was married when I was your age, and there are kids in this world who are dying of hunger, and etc. And then she said one day to me during one of those arguments, she said, Mom, just because you had different problems, just because other people have different problems, does not mean that my problems are not valid. And it was a big wake up call kind of a statement for me. And after that, I was like, you know what, she's absolutely right. Like, what she's going through is absolutely valid. And I need to step into her shoes and understand. So I just threw myself into reading books about child psychology, about childhood trauma. Um, it was the same time when I was writing my book, so my childhood trauma was coming forward as well. So I was able to put myself in her shoes, and we did a lot of joint therapy together, and learned and to communicate and to validate each other and to grow out of that experience together. And the biggest lesson I've learned through that is that, you know, it's not your job to solve your children's problem. As a parent, we tend to go into problem solving mode right away. We want to protect them, we want to solve their issues, we want to make sure that nothing happens to them, nothing harms them. We can't do that. It's impossible. But our job is not to do that. Like, empathy is not about solving problems. Empathy is about holding space and being there for them and hold their hand and make sure that they don't feel that they're alone, and they feel supported, and they know that there's a safety net. They know they have someone to catch them if they fall. And so I went from that parent who was always in problem solving mode to completely doing a full different approach to parenting. And there was one time towards the end of our therapy, group therapy, or we went into an 8-month group therapy program. And towards the end of it, there was one time when we were in a session, and this was a group of me and her, and then other parents of their youth as well, who were struggling with these issues. And she had a panic attack during the session. She got up and she went out of the building, and she went outside and sat in the middle of the street. It was a very quiet street, but a street. And she sat in the middle of the street, and she was obviously quite distressed. She was saying things like, I don't want to live, I don't want to go on. Your life would be much better without me. If I wasn't born, you could have left that a lot sooner. Your life has just been a problem because of me, and blah blah blah. And I could see that she was just having a really hard time. And in that moment, instead of what I may have said to her, if this had happened 2 years before, I may have been like, get up, don't, this is so embarrassing. Let's go back inside. We can talk about it when we go home. Like, what are you doing? Why are you creating a scene, etc., etc. I just, like, I knew that I had to be there for her in that moment. I couldn't leave her alone. So I sat down with her in the middle of the street, and in broad daylight, it was like 4 p.m. We're both sitting in the middle of the street. And she looks at me and she's like, Mom, what are you doing? You're going to sit with me here in your short dress and 4-inch heels. I said, yes, I will, because I love you. And I'm not going to leave you alone. And can I just sit here with you and hold your hand, please? And she said, okay, yeah, I'd like that. And we sat there for maybe 5 minutes, and she broke down crying. She hugged me, sobbed uncontrollably for a couple minutes, got back up and said, okay, mom, let's go back inside. Thank you for not leaving me alone. And we went back in and finished this group session with our hands held under the table. And it was a very profound moment for both of us, because it was in that moment where I knew that my job was not to stand there and solve her problems. My job was to sit there with her and hold her hand as she works through that trauma, and she knows that she's not alone. And we continue to do that for each other. And that is the way, to help your children. Trauma doesn't go away. You don't move on from trauma. You move on with it. You grow with it. And the more you are connected with your children, the more you can help them through that process. And there was a time a couple of years ago when I thought my daughter wouldn't even finish high school. She dropped out of high school. She got involved with the wrong crowd for a little while. She just didn't want to go on with her life. I really thought she would never be able to even finish that. And today, in September, in a few months, she's going into one of the best filmmaking programs in the country in university, and she got into that. And when I talk to her about it, she often says, "Yeah, mom, we did it together." And yeah, she's still filled with self-doubt. Yesterday we had a conversation about she's like, I don't know if I'm going to fit in and all of that. And I took a gap year. I'm like, you know what? You're going to do fine. You're going to do absolutely fine. Look what you've conquered so far. You're going to be amazing. And that's our job as parents, is to just be there for them, lift them up, and make sure that they don't feel alone in their process.
Yeah,
I hope that helps.
That was great. That was great. Well, I have one more quick question. Just because you've encountered so many women and experience and just have been doing this for so long now, what is the one thing that you like to leave people with? I know you said that this is your purpose, to make sure people know that they're not alone, that they can get out. Like, what is, because I have these nuggets too when I talk. Like, what is the one thing that you want to make sure that every woman who's in a situation where they don't feel safe and they want out, but they don't know how to leave? Like, what is the one thing that you would say to them?
I would say, be very, very kind to yourself, and be very non-judgmental to yourself. Like, you are a rock star for even thinking, about leaving. You're a rock star for trying and doing whatever you can. Even the little steps you're taking by listening to a conversation on YouTube, or a podcast about this, or calling a lawyer and getting just basic free information about what your rights are, or reaching out to a friend and just saying, hey, something's off and I don't get it. Reading an article about abuse, like whatever it is you're doing, these are necessary steps towards leaving. And I know in my journey, often I felt that I'm not strong enough to do this, but strength doesn't mean that you don't have weak moments. Courage doesn't mean that you're not afraid. And confidence doesn't mean that you're not filled with self-doubt. Life is about, yes, you do feel self-doubt, you are afraid, you have weak moments, and then you get back up and you say, I'm going to do this, I'm going to move forward, I'm going to take one more step. And that's what strength and courage is. So congratulate yourself on that. Be proud of yourself for that. And just be your own champion. Stand in front of a mirror and give yourself those pep talks. Hold your own hand in the middle of the street, and be your own best friend. And what I'd also say is, for others around you, even if you may not be going through this yourself, I can guarantee you that you know someone who is. And you may not know yet if they are who they are, but there is someone in your circle, in your family, in your workplace, in your community, in your friends, who is going through this. 1 in 3 women in North America will have suffered from intimate partner violence at some point in their lives. 1 in 2 women are affected by physical or sexual harassment of some sort. That is half of us. And these are quite underreported stats, because we don't take into account psychological and emotional violence, which is often equally, if not more, damaging. So even if you yourself are not going through this, you know someone who is. So make sure you do whatever you can to create that safe space for them to be able to come to you. And if you see a woman who keeps going back, be there for them unconditionally. unconditional, non-judgmental support, because it's not easy to leave. The worst thing you can hear as a woman who's trying to leave is like when people say, oh, well, you went back again, I guess you don't have it in you. Because it's not easy. It's really, really hard. And to do whatever you can to pay it forward, especially right now, during the COVID times, domestic violence is on the rise. Isolation is an abuser's best friend. And right now, isolation is being handed to abusers on a silver platter.
Right.
Women have nowhere to go, no reprieve, because they are probably not going to work, and they can't, see their friends and family due to social distancing. The abuser's not going anywhere. You're stuck at home with an abuser who is frustrated, who is stressed out, who might be under financial stress. There's a crisis time, and guess who becomes the punching bag? It's the victim. And so right now is an especially dangerous time. I keep reading articles and reports of how there are shelters that are full. Just 2 nights ago, a woman reached out to me on Twitter, and she was telling me she's called 15 shelters in the area, and she just can't find space anywhere.
Right.
So it's not like a woman can just go and stay with a friend or a family because of social distancing. Now that's not an option either, right? So right now is an even more important time to be very aware of this and to do whatever you can to offer connection. It might even be just dropping off some homemade food, or just reaching out to a friend and talking to them, hey, are you doing okay? Because each time you do that, it humanizes them, and it makes them feel, yes, I matter and I'm not alone. Because the worst thing that can happen is a woman is stuck in that situation and she feels that she's absolutely alone and there's no way out. And
Right.
And no one should feel that way.
And you have a domestic abuse connection circle on Mondays at 8 p.m. And can you tell us where everyone can follow you? So
So if you go to my website, and I'm going to type it here, it's just my name.com. And on Monday nights at 8 p.m., I've started a domestic abuse connection circle, which is really to talk about different topics underneath domestic abuse, especially with the lens of the COVID crisis right now. So last night was the first one, and I talked about the 5 reasons why domestic violence is rising during the COVID times. So isolation, financial stress, support systems are at overcapacity, et cetera, et cetera. And then what can we do about it as a community? Next week, so next Monday, it's going to be about emotional and psychological abuse. And then the following week, I'm going to bring in a family lawyer to talk about some basic family law knowledge, and I'm going to bring in a child psychologist at some point to talk about the impact on children. But there's different topics, and it's very intimate and just to connect, like authentic connection kind of an environment. It's open to anyone. So whether you're going through it, whether you think you're going through it, or you know someone who is, or you just want to learn more about the cause and see how you can help, please join in, please spread the word. Because right now we need as much of these community grassroots supports as possible. And I'm hoping that, it will just create a safe space for women, because right now, they don't have that in person. So maybe we can all come together and share ideas of how we can help.
Yeah. Well, thank you for
knowledge
so much
is power. So that's what I'm trying to do, spread the knowledge.
Yes. And thank you so much for that. I mean, I started reading statistics on domestic abuse recently, and I texted my good friend who's a prosecutor in the DC area, and I said, oh no, I think I'm going to have to go back and become a prosecutor, because I have a law degree that I've abandoned.
Oh,
and
wow.
I thought I'm gonna have to go back and I'm gonna have to be a prosecutor, because I can't deal with these domestic violence stats and the way that it's being ignored, and and so I'm really glad that you're talking about this. And I think for those of us that can't go back to practicing law at the moment but can do other things, like this is just sharing your story and my ability to put it out there. Like, this is how we get the word out. And so thank you so much for this. And thanks everyone who joined, and I appreciate everything you're doing.
Please, you can find me on social media. I'm very, very easily searchable. I'm on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. Connect with me, write to me if you have any ideas for future topics. If something that you'd like to contribute, like, I'm really, really open to all conversations, and I'm very approachable. So please reach out.
Thank you so much. All right. Well, everyone, have a great day.
Thanks everybody for
Care.
joining.
Thank you. Bye-bye.